Another one from SQE1 window. It is chapter 10 of our discussion on tort law, that is Nuisance and Rayland versus Fletcher. So we will try to understand nuisance. This is one of the torts, and before we were talking about negligence, and this is with another topic of SQE1 that is tested, and we'll try to understand that how it works, what are different elements of nuisance. So if negligence is about careless behavior, nuisance is about being bad behavior, the kind who makes life miserable without necessarily breaking anything. You're not breaking tangible thing, but you are a badass, you can say. So at that point, the kind who makes life miserable without necessarily breaking anything, that's what I said, the tangible thing. You don't break a car, you don't break someone's phone or anything, but you have done something that is bad for other people around you. It is all about balance. The law tries to balance your right to enjoy your land with your neighbor's right to enjoy theirs. There are two main types. Private nuisance affects an individual's use or enjoyment of land, while public nuisance affects the community, people around you, or a group of people. It is not about perfection. The law does not promise silence, fresh air, happiness. It asks what is reasonable in the circumstances. And the word reasonable is where most of your SQE1 marks hide. Be careful. So private nuisance, we try to understand what it is, and then we will shift to public nuisance. So private nuisance protects landowners and occupiers from substantial unreasonable interferences. These interferences can take many forms: loud music, factory smoke, bad smells, overhanging branches, or even your neighbor's trampoline bouncing into your garden every Sunday. To succeed, the claimant must show an unreasonable interference with the use or enjoyment of their land or physical damage to their property. The court considers several factors, for example, locality. In Scrooge versus Bridgman, a doctor complained about a noisy confectioner next door. The court said what is acceptable is a factory area might not be acceptable in quite residential areas. So meaning that by if it is like you are sitting in a market, it is you cannot expect a noise to the level of residential area. So where you live matters. You cannot expect country peace in central London. So if you're living in central London, you already understand that things will be a bit different. Duration and intensity of that nuisance is very important. A brief burst of noise or smell may not be enough, but constant disruption can cross the line, as it was in Crown River cruises. So number 3 is sensitivity. Some people are sensitive. For example, I got misophonia. I'm very sensitive to some noises. So I cannot go for nuisance against people who got flu and all. So in Robinson versus Gilbert, a factory owner's delicate paper was damaged by heat from another property. The court said the paper was unusually sensitive. No claim. The law protects the ordinary, not the delicate. Malice, that's what you need to look into in order to prove nuisance. In order to claim nuisance, sometimes bad behavior speaks of itself. In Christie versus Davy, a man banged on the wall just to annoy his musical neighbor. The court found his action malicious and unreasonable. What are the remedies then? Usually damages or injunction that you can stop your neighbor, or you can ask for damages, and yes, the court can literally tell someone to stop being annoying to your neighbors. So then we got public nuisance. Public nuisance steps beyond private disputes. It concerns interference that affects the public or significant group of people in an area. Think of blocked roads, polluted rivers, so illegal raves or dust clouds from factories. A private person can sue for public nuisance only if they suffer special damage, something more than the general public. For example, if a street is blocked and everyone is delayed, no claim. But if you lose business because your shop is inaccessible because of roadworks, of course, in that case, it might be a nuisance. In Attorney General case, noise and dust from a quarry affected a whole neighborhood. The court called it public nuisance par excellence. Another major example is Corby Group litigation, where toxic waste from land development caused birth defects in the community. The court confirmed the public nuisance can cover physical harm and as well as discomfort. So while private nuisance protects your backyard, public nuisance protects your town or group of people who can be affected by the nuisance. Another very interesting thing to learn in SQE, and I have seen these questions, believe me, in my SQE set that I did it in 2025. So now, for one of the tort law's most famous and slightly eccentric rule, that is Rayland versus Fletcher. And people who have studied tort must understand how important it was. And it was taught with all its sensitivity. This is the case where Mr. Fletcher reservoir burst and flooded Mr. Rayland's coal mine. The court created a special rule: if you bring something dangerous onto your land and it escapes, you are liable even if you were careful. And that is strict liability. You do not need to prove negligence, just the escape of something is dangerous. From a non-natural use of land, for example, if I bring some kind of big gas container and the gas is leaked, so I don't say I have done everything to protect my neighbors. No, the liability is strict. I brought something that is not natural on the land and I am liable for it. So there are four key elements to prove like nuisance under the umbrella of Rayland versus Fletcher. The defendant brought something onto the land. It was likely to cause harm if it escapes. The use was not natural and it escaped and caused damage. But over time, the court has narrowed the rule. In Transco versus Stockport, the court said it only applies to extraordinary and unusual use of land. Burst water means in ordinary housing, not extraordinary. For example, water bursts, and at that point, it is not extraordinary unless and until I fill my property with water. And then it escapes, because my property is not built for storing water. It's not water reservoir. It is a residential area and people live in here. But an ordinary burst will not be covered under Rayland versus Fletcher because I need my pipelines here. So let's go to SQE 1 Focus, our favorite, and that's why we have just explained everything. So alright, let's put this into SQE perspective. When you face a nuisance problem question, ask yourself, is this private or public nuisance? So asking yourself that is it private or public nuisance will make your life very easy. And another thing, what kind of interference it is, use and enjoyment or property damage it is. So was it reasonable given the location and duration? And could the claimant have been unusually sensitive? Are there any defenses like consent? Did they consent to it? Statutory authority, for example, people are doing it under law, or it is for public benefit. So you can't claim nuisance once a new public road is built at that point because it will be covered under statutory authority or public benefit. For Rayland versus Fletcher, check the escape, the dangerous substance, and whether the use was not natural. That's very important. Be careful not to confuse nuisance with negligence. Negligence focuses on carelessness, while nuisance focuses on interference. And remember, Cambridge Water versus Eastern countries, let the foreseeability of harm is now part of the test now. Even in strict liability, the harm must be foreseeable. Like, I just fill all my property with water. At that point, I foresee that it can harm other people. Your golden SQE question: has the defendant's use of their land been unreasonable or dangerous in the circumstances? If you can answer that correctly, you will have full control of any nuisance question that comes your way. So nuisance is where tort law meets real life. It's about noisy neighbor, smelly factories, flooding fields, and escaping sheeps. Or sometimes people have wild animals at their property, and they know that it can, and they can foresee it can just escape and harm people. It shows how the law protects everyday comfort, not absolute silence, but reasonable peace. Private nuisance protects individual, public nuisance protects communities, and Rayland versus Fletcher stands as that quick rule, reminding everyone to keep dangerous things where they belong, not to bring them to your home. Next time we shall turn into different topics, and we'll try to look at liability, concept of liability in tort. So thank you very much for joining us today, and to improve your understanding or test your understanding, go to our notes and question banks. Thank you. Have a good day.